With degrees in criminal justice and ethics, over 30 years of investigative experience, a recognized expert in investigation procedures, and an expert in criminal and social behaviors, I am Rick Decker, and this is A Shadow of Truth. Greetings from sunny Charleston, South Carolina. It's been 71 days, ladies and gentlemen, since I have recorded my last episode. This is my first episode since my almost demise from COVID months ago. I've spent 55 days in the hospital and undergoing treatment and rehabilitation. It appears that someone at my age, 64, doesn't recover as efficiently as one used to. This episode was suggested by one of our listeners up in Ohio, Mark F. That's Mark as in Frank. And I wanted to thank him for writing in and making this suggestion. It meant a lot to me at the time when I was in the hospital that someone had taken the time to write back to me and have some input for the show. Like I said, it's been almost 71 days, 72, since I have recorded a show. So I thought it was a great way to reopen the show to other possibilities, and at the same time trying to keep on track. I am humbled and grateful for everybody that has continued to listen during my recovery. So let's get back on track here. Now, my intention is not to politicize the show. However, that doesn't mean that we don't discuss political issues. I don't generally buy into conspiracy theories because they lack fact-based evidence most of the time. But my show and my professional career is all about shedding light on otherwise dark topics. So using my experience as a forensic sociologist and criminologist, an investigator, and a deputy coroner, and a paramedic, we will look at Mr. Epstein's situation and derive, using those skill sets and available public information, as what I think about Mr. Epstein's death and his psychological profile. And like I said, before we dig into this, let me be clear that my background, other than academic training and paramedic work from another lifetime ago, I'm also trained in other types of positions in the medical field. I've worked as a operating tech, deputy coroner, lab tech. I've done a lot of things to bring me to where I'm at today that help me look at investigations and in a different light than most investigators. I have the ability to see things that other investigators may miss, particularly in medical cases. Now, that doesn't mean I'm the go-to one and all type investigator. You get somebody that is a forensic nurse, they will see things from a different lens than what I do. My job is to remain true to myself and offer you an alternative way of seeing things. I will not offer concrete opinions because simply I don't have access to those files. We are basing my opinions on my experience and knowledge to decipher information on any case and to offer my thoughts on the topic and to help you expand your horizons. Mr. Epstein's life was modest. He was born in Brooklyn. His mom She was a teacher's aide, and his dad worked as a groundskeeper and a gardener with New York's Park and Recreation. Jeff had two siblings younger than him. Jeffrey attended several schools, both public and semi private, but he never matriculated through institutions of higher learning. Now, even with the lack of professional credentials, he was allowed to teach at a private school where he had there gained the attention of his superiors. And they thought that during a teachers' conference, he had misspoke and was trying to recruit a female student there. And that was prior to his leaving. Now, afterwards, Jeffrey worked in different backgrounds: banking, financial consultant, and a plethora of other things where it would put him in the position to being with people of high financial influence. And we're not trying to cover his entire life, and just let it be known that he changed jobs a great deal, and that because of the jobs that he had, he was in position to be with people of influence. And he was also alleged in taping people in his home in Florida, I think it was, allegations of inappropriate behaviors. Now, one needs to understand that when people like Mr. Epstein are finally caught, they have a history of inappropriateness throughout their lives, adjudicated or not. And up until recent years, nothing had really been done to Epstein other than a slap on his hand and an investigation here and there. Now, all of this information tells me that he had predatory behavior. And this behavior lays deep within the psyche of narcissists, wanting to control people and have that control over others so that they can feel powerful. He clearly had some traits of egotistic dominance, which is where they're trying to control the behavior of others to meet their own personal needs. Yes, he was antisocial. One can see that in his exhibition in violating societal rules for his own personal gain. We could sit here all day and throw Freud at him and argue different pretenses, but never really sum him up. However, if you've listened to my previous episodes, the behavior Epstein exhibited is much like what we see in serial killers. Although he wasn't a serial killer, his behavior is serial in like that he has a passion for providing young females to older males for sexual exploitation and exploration, either way that you want to look at it. Pedophilia like behaviors, they have this tendency to want to control others' lives, and it gives them excitement, sometimes sexual excitement, to have that control over people. I am aware that this topic is extremely sensitive to people, and predators like this that prey on kids, I don't care what your logic is to use to justify that behavior, particularly with cancel culture addressing it, and the way that they address it, and I don't agree with it, and I'll just be open about it. I don't give a damn who you are, what your opinion is. You know, this behavior is wrong. And yes, in my tenure as a criminal defense investigator, I have defended sex offenders. to the best of my ability. The caveat, ladies and gentlemen, however, is that all my investigations are and were based on fact, evidence based, so that when the evidence was presented in an appropriate manner on each of my sex offenders, each of them saw the handwriting on the wall and took plea deals. They got a good defense. The evidence was just too overwhelming to substantiate trying to plead anything else other than guilty. Even today, when lawyers hire me to look at their cases, I will tell them, I will follow the evidence, I will find the truth on all cases, no matter if it's a sex case or any other type case. I always predicated that I would follow the evidence and follow the truth. So I'm not the guy to hire if you're wanting to offer alternative versions to a case that hide the evidence. But if you want an alternative version of the case that brings new evidence to light or supported evidence that the prosecutor is not showing, then I'm your guy. Sign me up, because I'm all about one thing: finding the truth. Okay, I digress. Let's get back on the train. The question here is Epstein dead? Yes or no? Did somebody do it? Did he do it to himself? Now, I've read through everything that I can find: Google, DuckDuckGo, and Google Scholar. Based on those search engines and some of the colleagues I've had the ability to talk to that live up in the New York, New Jersey area, all the opinions, as I knew they would be, are mixed. Now, as a former medic and deputy coroner, let me say that I've seen a lot of hangings, many types of them, using bed sheets, towels, cables, come along straps, wires. The list goes on. I've seen people try and hang themselves from shower heads, trees, garage rafters, catwalks in large factories, I-beams. Again, the list is endless. But never have I read or seen someone successfully or attempt to hang themselves from the lower bunk of a bunk bed set. Are you freaking kidding me? Bunk beds, okay. I've seen someone use the frame from the very top and to try and kill themselves. And after he tried to make the bed unmovable using a long dog leash cable, with that, he wasn't successful. But the lower bunk and the report, I had to laugh when I read that, but the report indicated that he was trying to hang himself from the framing of the lower bunk. If they misspoke, which it looks like they may have done later in the report, that's one thing, but not from a lower bunk. That's just doesn't make any damn sense. Was the bunk the lower or the upper bunk? It really doesn't matter. I will tell you this, that anyone looking for a way to really end their lives will find a way to do it, even in the most unusual circumstances, which what it looks like at first blush on this case with Jeffrey Epstein. So now really the question just remains: is he dead? Did he do it himself? Is there a cover-up? Is it a suicide, a homicide? Let me say this, over my years of experience, all I can say is that if you have enough money anything is possible. Anything. You have to really look at the data. And to that end, that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the information. We're going to look at what doesn't and what does make sense. And frankly, not a whole hell of a lot of this makes sense to me based off my past experience and education. One of the first things that you've got to look at is that he was put in a cell with an individual with a known criminal history of murders and drug charges. Now, in jail life, being put in the cell with somebody like that when you are trafficking kids or a pedophile or commit a crime against a child or women, that's a bad combination. That, you know, even among the worst degenerates of our society, or people that we consider the worst degenerates of our society, have a standard. And that standard is you don't hurt women, you don't hurt kids. And let me go back to Jeffrey Dahmer, who was murdered in his cell because his victims, some of them were kids, some of them were adults, kids meaning 18 to 20. You go to any prison and pedophiles are locked up in their own seclusionary ward because general population will do them in. So at first, that's that. Secondly, we've got protocols being violated. Camera didn't work, and guards never checked on him, even though they wrote in the log that they had checked on him. I'd also make issue of the fact that nobody ever said anything about, once they discovered the camera wasn't working, that they put a work order in to have that camera repaired. Now, I know that in New York area, Rikers and the Metropolitan Correction Center where Epstein was, they are having problems with staff like anywhere else. There are shortages. Rikers is under investigation now for poor health conditions. I mean, it just goes all the way around. But that said, it still doesn't account for why deputies did not follow protocol, report cameras, check on the individual like they were supposed to, other than they were lazy, or they were paid or told not to by somebody above them. And that goes, we'll never know. In normal circumstances, in my experience in jails that I've been around, if they were on suicide watch and the camera was broken, they would have been moved immediately, and they sure as hell wouldn't have been put and left alone in a jail cell with somebody that could have caused them harm. And then we have some of the other things that could be questioned. It was like when they first found Epstein in his cell, the corrections officer had reportedly jumped up and said, "Oh, he hung himself." But as anyone knows that has worked in law enforcement and or corrections, that could have been easily dismissed because, to be truthful, suicides are a common occurrence inside long-term institutions. And unfortunately, many times what they do is they hang themselves. The other thing that was pointed out in some of the reports was that they had found his pills, which were readily available up on the top bunk. Now, I don't know about some institutions, but the ones I have been familiar with throughout my career, a nurse or a doctor is the individual that passes out all the meds. Their inmates do not have access to their medications because of fear of overdose. They go to the doctor or go to the nurse's window. They account for who they are. They take their medicine and have to prove to the individual that's dispensing it that they swallowed it and they're not cheeking it. And I don't want to assume that everybody knows what I'm talking about, but not to insult anybody. What I mean is cheeking it. People will typically hide their pills in their cheek underneath their tongue in hopes to be able to spit it out later for some other nefarious or reason that they don't want to take their medicine. We see this a lot in psych patients typically. The other big red flag for me was that the night before all this had occurred, he met with his lawyers in setting up his will and signing documents to say who got what. It was almost like they were doing a hospice like preparation, like they knew he was going to pass away. Now, they're going to say that it was just because of the possibility of him being found guilty and he needed to be able to have his assets managed after he was adjudicated, which is common occurrence as well, especially people that have a lot of money and have a lot of things that need to be managed. They will sign over to an executor or to a CEO of a company or somebody that will handle all the daily operations and finances and company affairs. Now, some of the other things that stand out as red flags, and again, which for the jail environment is typical, and I hate to say that it's typical, but it really is, because saying it's typical nullifies and minimizes legitimate interactions, and that is when inmates claim that they're being mistreated by a staff member or a corrections officer, and that there have been threats made against them. And in Jeffrey's case, he had verbalized that on a couple of occasions, that the guard that we would see ultimately that failed to check on him and falsified documents locked him up in a shower room for an unreasonable amount of time. So that's typical. Now, the thing I want to highlight here is that Jeff was in there for basically sex crimes, okay? Sex crimes that involved kids and women. And in the jail environment, like I said before, that really makes other inmates very angry. And I don't want to hang my hat on all this, but it's a reality that deserves repeating. And that is that people that commit particularly sex crimes against kids have short life term expectancies in general population. And be frank, Mr. Epstein was locked up with another individual that had a history of murder and drug crimes, who had had no compulsion about taking that man's life if he thought he could get away with it. Now, I know the inmate was later found not to have done that, but I'm just saying. So let's move on from that. Now we're going to get into the scenario that inside the cell when all this started happening. Now, based on my experience and education, suicide is always treated like a homicide. And the reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, is that suicide is illegal. People that survive are not generally prosecuted for attempted murder. They are sent into the mental institutions and mental health, thankfully. But each successful suicide is treated like a homicide. That means crime scene photos are taken, evidence is collected, the body is photographed in place before it is ever moved. The only exception to that is when it was not a successful suicide. EMS arrives and they find a viable pulse and implement life-saving protocols and transport. And from what I can tell, that was appropriate in this situation because the guards found him with a heartbeat and transported him. With that being said, I mean, there's still a lot of questions that present itself. If he was found with a heartbeat, okay, that's fine. And they transported, but there still should have been an outline where the body was found. There still should have been photographs of the situation as he was found and what the cell looked like at that time. Some investigator botched this from the get-go. Proper notation was not made. People were not separated and interviewed. They were left to be able to coordinate their stories that fit the situation. And on top of that, there were drugs found on the top bunk that were accessible to him. The question is, why? And why did they not photograph the implements that he used to try and hang himself? From an investigator's point of view, those raise a lot of questions, along with some of the other details that were out there, like why weren't reports filed? Why wasn't he in a padded room? Why did they not move him to a cell by himself instead of being with someone that could cause him harm? You know, there's a lot of whys that need to be answered. And as far as I can tell, they never even collected evidence or took pictures of the body in the hospital, which would have been appropriate protocol as well. They just moved him to the ME's office. Now, as far as the pathology, I am nowhere qualified to debate or dispute the pathology reports. However, over my years as a medic and a deputy coroner, I have seen in both suicides and homicide cases frontal strangulation type injuries. And those injuries were seen on Mr. Epstein. Now, one person said it was indicative of being hung, and the other individual said it was indicative of being strangled. Both are correct because hanging is technically strangulation. Both can break the hyoid bone. But with hanging, in typical sense, it snaps the cervical spine, C1, C2, and causes a priapism. Look it up. I'm not going to explain it. Hangings typically in men cause a priapism, and there's no mention of that in this case. Now, I didn't say it happened in every hanging. I'm just saying typically in hangings, that is something that medically we see. Now, getting into the people that want answers to some of the questions that we presented today, Attorney General Barr, the senators, and other officials, I agree. This smells funny. In layman's terms, if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, then it's a damn duck. People subsequently lost their jobs and were charged with misconduct, and a lengthy investigation on this. And then it just kind of has seemed to vanish from purview. And that happens often in cases that are questionable and in cases that are not questionable. The unfortunate thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is that this case, I feel, will forever be like JFK and Hoffa and like so many others who have left our world under suspicious circumstances. And we will never know the truth or why or who did what. My take on Epstein was that he was a narcissist, antisocial predator. He took advantage of anything and anyone he could for his own predilections. And you've got to think, I mean, he provided young women to men that had that predilection of having sex with younger girls. You know, voyeurism is still part of that predilection. And, I'm sure he got his jollies off knowing that it was going on and maybe watching it. The problem we see in life is that people with more power and money than you and I, they, like everybody else, are hiding from some type of skeleton in their closet. We all have them. It's just a matter of the level of which they're at. If they're something that an indiscretion that we committed or a major crime. We've all got stuff that we hide. We all have two sides of personalities that we show. One we keep, and then one that we show our workers based and the other people in society based on the roles that we play. And we've talked about that. It's called dramaturgy. And as we bring this show to an end, I feel that it is more than appropriate to mention an organization that is run by Ashton Kutcher called Thorn, Thorn. It works to stop human trafficking. And I've looked into it and I've listened to Mr. Kutcher in front of Congress. And if you have the ability to donate to that organization, please do. You can donate to them knowing that you're trying to put an end to the sex trade and the use of children. Also, we have an 800 number for reporting lost and missing children. 1-800-THE-LOST. That's 800-843-5678. That's 800-THE-LOST. People should be accessing those two organizations. They're out there. They work with the authorities. And we can end this if we work together. Mr. Kutcher's organization is Thorn, Thorn.org. Again, Thorn.org. I hope you all reach out to them and do your part in ending any type of human trafficking or sex trade work. And now, a side note. You just heard me endorse and advocate for those two organizations. And there are other organizations that I have mentioned and businesses on my show. I want everybody to know that nobody pays me to do this, to endorse a business or an organization. I do this and I endorse them because I see someone that needs help. I see a business or an organization that needs a hand up. So I do it out of the goodness of my heart. And truth be told, I don't take on any businesses that say, I'll pay you if you mention this on your show. I don't at this point in time, because I'm doing it because I want to help others. And that is the crux and the core of my show is helping others get what they want because it feels good. And if you help other people, you will grow as well. Those of you that follow very closely know that I recently spent 55 days in various hospitals from COVID, and I can't possibly remember or find the names of everybody that contributed to my recovery. However, the nurses and doctors at Roper, Berkeley, in Berkeley County, South Carolina, and the OT that told me, oh, we listened to your show and we think we can listen to you, and the PT, the young lady that just moved here from Florida, whose husband is Coast Guard. Thank you for everything that you did for me and gave me back. To the OT and PTs in the hospital, Berkeley Occupational Rehab. Yeah, Morgan, Michael, Gail, and many others, nurses and doctors that contributed to my recovery to the point where I was able to come back, do my show, and make your lives miserable once again. I can never, ever repay any of them for giving me them giving me back my life. But when you remember these people, first responders, medical, show them respect and dignity that they deserve. All right, listen. Thank you for listening to the show. Even though I was out, it's been 70 some days since the last show. We are almost up to 10,000 downloads. I want to once again thank Mark F., as in Frank, from Ohio. Mark, I think you live in Ohio because that's what your IP address said that the email came from. If you're not, I apologize, but thank you for writing the show and suggesting this topic. Everybody can use our email and write the show at a shadow of truth podcast at gmail.com to give me ideas or make comments on our episodes. I want to once again thank everybody for listening. We have descriptions in our or links in our descriptions that go to our landing page that offer links to my publications, show merchandise, and even if you want to donate to the show, you can donate, or to a special interest group that we're supporting that I have links on the landing page for as well. All proceeds that are made to the show stay to the show to keep the show on the air. Until next time, search for the truth. Use your voice to be heard. Take care of one another. Carpe diem.